So welcome, Debra. So great to have you. And thank you everyone for tuning in today. We have another exciting session for you all. But before we begin, I'll start with who I am and why I'm here. So I'm Ariel Russo. I lead community efforts for Brand Innovators. And a huge part of this rewarding role means I have the opportunity to work with the most innovative and inspiring leaders of today. Which brings me to our purpose for this session. Today, we will welcome global business executive, change agent, thought leader, and marketing expert, Debra Bass, to the stage. Debra has an incredible journey marking her impact across all fronts, from CPG, big pharma, early stage tech, and much, much more. So let's begin. Hello, Debra, and welcome once again.
Hi, Arielle, and I have to just acknowledge Lauren Rotolo, having come from J&J. Wow, what an inspiration. So just need to give her a shout out. I was really inspired by her talk and still feel a connection to her from my time at J&J.
I love that. Well, with your background, you have an extensive, impressive background. Can you dive into your overall career journey and give us just a high-level overview of the leadership roles you served at larger brands like Johnson & Johnson, Bristol Myers Squibb, Panasonic, Procter & Gamble? I can go on and on.
Yeah.
To your evolution towards an early-stage tech startup at Nouveau Group, where you now serve as the brand's global chief marketing officer and president.
Sure. So I'm going to talk through my career journey and help folks understand some of the choices I made with an overall theme of, if it's to be, it's up to me, that you really have to own and navigate your career and forge your way, not the way. So I would actually start my career, believe it or not, junior year in college. I was a public policy major at Duke, and I decided to study abroad in London, which is very commonplace now, but when I did this in the late 80s, like not as common. And while in London, I fell in love with marketing and advertising and communications and knew I wanted to pursue something in that space. And as a public policy major, I was required to do an internship in Capitol Hill that summer. And I said, you know what? I don't want to go to Capitol Hill. I'm going to find a way to do a policy issue or lean into a policy issue, but work in marketing. And I was able to find an internship at AT&T, which launched my career in marketing, but allowed me to sort of write my policy thesis. After AT&T, I went back to business school and really wanted to get foundational experience in general management and brand management. And that started my career at Procter & Gamble, which was really amazing training, right? As many know, they mainly hire and promote from within and give great experience in the fundamentals. And I had two very different experiences there. One in laundry, which is like the big sort of muscle of P&G, right, where you learn the fundamentals. And then I had a very different experience in color cosmetics, which was a new business at P&G, and we talked about going from soap to hope, right? When you're selling cosmetics, it's really aspiration. After P&G, I took my first sort of bold risk move in career, which is I went from CPG to pharmaceuticals. I had a really interesting opportunity to go to Bristol Myers Squibb and be part of this new hired team of classically trained marketers that were coming into a direct-to-consumer group to help pharma companies really leverage direct-to-patient marketing, which is a big part of the demand generation engine in pharma, but also to be pipeline talent for the big pharma brands. So spent a couple years at Bristol Myers Squibb, and then went to Johnson & Johnson for 15 years in different commercial capacities. I started out in US consumer, in femcare, and then I ran US baby. And then I spent 6 years in medical devices and orthopedics. That was another sort of risk going over to a brand new category. And then I spent my last 5 years at J&J in global consumer, leading the global baby franchise at a big time of change, and then leading global marketing services as my last role there, which is the marketing capabilities group at J&J, actually how I came to know Brand Innovators through that role. And then for me personally, after 25 plus years of big co, I got the bug to join a new co and really wanted to get that entrepreneurial experience. So I joined Nouveau almost 4 years ago as their US president and chief marketing officer. Nouveau has very novel technology for remote pregnancy monitoring and management. And it's an Israeli founded health tech company where I was employee one in the US.
Wow, that's an incredible background. Let's dive even deeper and share with our audience some of the even more important lessons that you've championed in the past 25 years, beginning with your favorite part about being a leader. So, on our call together, you shared exactly what about leadership excites you the most. The ability to be a true change agent is what you said. And you even just talked about this a little bit earlier, forging your own way. Can you share more about what this type of role means to you and how you served as a change agent throughout your career?
Sure. So, a change agent to me is part of the vanguard of a new culture, a new business mission, a new movement to really get different results through change, right? We know insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. And I would say my first bold change agent role was at DePuy when I left sort of the comfort and what was known of more of my CPG experience. And then I went over to orthopedics. And DePuy, for those who aren't familiar with it, it's now DePuy Synthes. They have the joint replacement business, so hip and knee implants and spinal implants. And we bought the trauma business from Synthes. And when I first came over to DePuy, I was really hired for that something different of classical marketing to really be leveraged in two ways. One is to build a brand franchise for all of the different operating companies that tucked under DePuy. We wanted the whole to be greater than the sum of the parts. The second was to really shore up the direct to patient capabilities to drive demand through the consumer for elective surgeries. And when I first went over there, I got shunned by many because it's a category with lots of institutional knowledge, people that have spent their whole careers in orthopedics, right? So they were very sort of narrow and deep in terms of their expertise, and they had relationships with the surgeons and they had relationships with all the infrastructure, and they were known quantities in the space. So I had a lot of people kind of dismiss me when I first went over there. It's like, what could this person possibly bring to orthopedics? She knows nothing about it. And I really had to earn my keep by putting some points in the board that created impact for the business and some, swagger for the organization in terms of new identity. I'll pause there, or Arielle, and just see where you want to take it.
No, I love that. I mean, going to orthopedics, moving from CPG to pharma, big co to new co, your career also really strongly represents that power of risk. So overall, I think the next question I would love to ask you is, what is the biggest risk you've taken in your overall career journey? And what can those tuning in learn about that importance of taking risks to achieve that next level of success?
Sure. So I'm going to talk about two risks. One that I actually didn't mention in my little career journey, because I'll call it my sort of distraction for a year, but it was a risk that didn't work out. So the first one was I neglected to mention that in between J&J Consumer and DePuy, I went to Panasonic for 1 year as VP of North American marketing for their consumer electronics company. And for those that are not close to Panasonic, it's a Japanese company, very traditional Japanese culture. And when I went there in 2007, I was one of the highest ranking women there as a VP. And women didn't have much place or stature in that company, particularly in the traditional part of it in Japan, a little bit less so in the US. But the headline is I spent a year there because it was not a great cultural fit. And really where the rub for me came in was I had 2 young children, and there was not the infrastructure of support for some of the work-life balance needs I had in terms of, again, managing my job and also my family. So one of the lessons for folks there is to really sniff out the culture and also what you need from an employer before you go there, because I think I was seduced by a new category. I was excited to work for a Japanese company. I'd only worked for American companies, but in hindsight, I didn't do enough diligence about the culture and was it really a fit for not only my professional needs, but my life stage needs. And, it fell short there, didn't work out. was fortunate to pave a path back to J&J. The second big risk that I took in my career was going from the comfort of multinationals to an early stage startup. And again, I joined Nouveau as employee one. We didn't yet have a validated product. We were still going through clinical validation. We were still going through the regulatory pathway for clearance. So big risk in terms of going to a startup, right? There's always a risk there, but also a less resourced environment than what I was familiar with. But it's been incredibly rewarding to learn a whole new set of skills at this stage of my career. And I'll just touch on a few of those skills and pause. So one, learning how to raise capital, right? I've never been on fundraising roadshows as part of my experience in big company, and have had the pleasure of working with our board and my founder in raising capital, right? And it's really, really hard, but it's part of what's important in a startup because it's the lifeblood for new growth. The second sort of big new skill set learning is around market creation, right? Nothing existed. We had a product. So I had to drive development of the corporate narrative, of the corporate brand, of the product brand. And you're starting from a white sheet of paper, right? It's not like I'm going to go work on Johnson's Baby and it's stood for this for X amount of years. And here's my sort of incremental update, right? To keep it relevant. So market creation, new brand creation. And then the third big skill has been around very early stage business development in terms of conceptual selling to customers that are buying something that doesn't exist, like the Steve Jobs like thing, right? People don't really know what they want. You have to tell them and bring it to them and sort of make it work for their reality. So huge risk, incredibly rewarding in terms of new learning, new growth runway, at this stage of my career.
So you've clearly done so many incredible things. And I know we've spoken about risk at this point and all of the impact you've made on these different companies. I'd love for you to share how the power of networking and a relationship has been integrated into this story. So how important is relationship building, and how can professionals expand their network to grow and develop as leaders, just as you have?
Sure. So for those of you who know me, and I'm guessing perhaps some in the audience do, networking is part of my lifeblood and comes very natural to me, right? I'm a connector at my core. And I network both internally, not only through the expanded circles around my job and where I sit, but also employee resource groups. So while at J&J, I was on the executive steering team of the Women's Leadership Initiative, which was a fantastic group to help advance women in the company, but also build my network, not only internally, but also externally, because it had a link to the Healthcare Women's Business Association, which is a really powerful external network in healthcare. I continue to network in the industry, right? Being part of Brand Innovators is an extension of an external network and community, which I want to give to, but also get back from in terms of new learnings, new connections, et cetera. So I would say that networking is really important. And my advice to everyone listening in is to think about networking, not only internally, whatever company you sit in, but also externally in terms of affinity groups, alliances, organizations, just to expand the potential of your network.
Totally. And with the importance of networking, I also would love to ask, is there or was there any defining person throughout your career that made an impact on your own journey? Tell us more about what mentorship means to you and perhaps how mentorship has shaped your own story.
Sure. So I'll give a few examples there. And I think less about an individual and more about the archetypes of mentors and sponsors I've had. So early in my career, when I was less secure with who I am and what I was good at and what I wasn't good at, I had one of my first bosses at Procter & Gamble really point out to me some of my towering strengths that I had no idea were strengths because I had no perspective. I was just starting. So her pointing out my strengths gave me new confidence to lean into those strengths and to leverage those strengths and to build from those strengths, right? So sometimes mentors can see things in you that you don't see in yourself. And that's really important and powerful. The other part of mentoring is to give you advice objectively when you really need it. So at one point in my career, I was given advice from a coach that I should be more conformist to where I was, right? So I never dressed really conservatively. I was always someone that liked color and accessories, right? It's just who I am. I'm about self-expression. I had a coach tell me, you should tone it down to fit in. And I went to one of my mentors and I asked her, I said, do I need to do this? And she said, don't lose your flair. That's what makes you special, right? So again, an objective perspective you can get from mentors. And the other part of mentors, I'll elevate mentors to advocates or sponsors. I've been very fortunate in my career to have some advocates and sponsors that have placed bets on me to take on new roles. And that's how I was able to cross sectors at J&J, which isn't always easy, right? To get across to a new sector and even to take on new roles of increasing responsibility, just having those sponsors that really believe in you, that are willing to place a bet on you and give you backbone when you assume a new role.
Totally. So thank you so much for sharing that. I want to shift gears for a little bit because I think our audiences are also wondering this. After working for some of the biggest brands, what attracted you to early stage tech at Nouveau and being a part of a startup culture?
So there were a few converging forces that pushed me there. In my last job at J&J in global marketing services, we were looking at a lot of the trends in the marketplace, and we saw this whole new breed of direct to consumer brands being incubated all over the place that were hyper relevant to consumers, more relevant than we were, just in terms of the core value prop, in terms of the personalized communications, in terms of the channels to reach consumers. So one, I was intrigued by creating new brands to be relevant through some of the exposure in that role. The second thing is just really wanting to make a difference in people's lives. And that's part of what I loved about J&J and Bristol Myers, some of the healthcare companies, right? The bigger purpose beyond the product and what you're playing for. And then recognizing an opportunity to create and build something, leveraging the totality of my experiences, my skills, the network I've built, all of that really emboldened me to go into creation mode and be part of an early stage startup. And again, it's been really fun to be able to create something from nothing, right? Well, and to be fair, this company had a product, it wasn't nothing, but there was no real story or brand behind it, right? To help bring it to life and give it some punch on the market.
Totally. So to that end, what are some of your biggest learnings that you've taken from Johnson & Johnson and BMS to bring to your success at Nouveau?
Sure. So first, it's all about authenticity, right? So when you're building a brand and bringing your brand to life and creating experiences, you need to be authentic in terms of where your brand comes from and who are the consumers you serve and how do you delight them, et cetera. And I learned that through all my big co-experience. And what was exciting about Nouveau is the product is authentic because it's born out of a founder's story, right? So quick backstory is Nouveau has novel technology for remote pregnancy monitoring and management. And the founder, Ornaz, out of Israel, he and his wife navigated the burden of a high-risk pregnancy and had to go back and forth to the clinic multiple times a week. And he talked about his wife working and being pregnant and had this big epiphany. You know, data should travel, women should not. Why do women have to travel to get plugged into a wall? Like this is, at the time, it was 2014. So his big epiphany and personal experience and pain point created a new product and category and helped inform the brand. So one, it comes from a place of authenticity, a real life pain point. The second is articulating a bigger purpose, right? Of playing for something bigger beyond the product. And our purpose is to give life a better beginning, because for us, it's not only about that early monitoring, but also all the data signals we collect that could help with better management of the pregnancy at a formative stage of life for better outcomes. So really we exist to give life a better beginning. So part of the big co-experience of articulating your purpose, and that's really a reason for the organization to come in every day, the tie that binds, what keeps you centered and grounded during the tough times, right? In startups, there are many tough times. The other sort of lesson from Big Co that I brought to New Co is really leaning on and leveraging your best agency relationships, right? So throughout a career, I've built relationships with a lot of my agency partners at Interbrand and many of the different holding company agencies for creative agencies, digital agencies, media agencies. And while I couldn't afford to use any of them the same way I did while at big companies, I was able to negotiate smaller scopes with some of those most trusted agency partners to help get the Nouveau brand off the ground and really build something relevant to our consumers.
So I know we spoke a lot about the value of purpose to your consumers on our call, and as a smaller brand, I know you shared some of the learnings, but what are some more of the challenges that your team had to overcome in effectively reaching its consumers as a smaller brand?
So for us, the biggest challenge right now, because we're early and we're just getting adoption in the market, is it's a prescribed product. And while we believe the consumer is the ultimate customer and who we built this for to better serve, pregnant patients, expectant moms, it's a prescribed product. So job one is getting OBGYNs and maternal fetal medicine specialists on board. So we've really focused thus far on the B2B to start. And then the plan is to then unleash B2B to C to tack on the to C component once we have an installed base of prescribers. So it's been this challenge of wanting to go to the consumer earlier, but we can't go there before we have enough of a nationally representative group of prescribers, right? As I learned early in packaged goods, you can't advertise empty shelves. So I don't want to drive demand if there's nowhere for mom to get our product in her local community.
Totally. Well, I definitely sounds like a challenge. But speaking of challenges, you also mentioned being a part of Nouveau just as the pandemic began. Can you share with our audiences how this Israeli-based company adapted to this pandemic era and what the challenges a global team has faced and overcome over the past few years?
Sure. So one, I'll say that fortunately for me, it started with equity in the bank of being able to build the relationships in real life before the pandemic started. And I think when you're working with people from a different country and a different culture who speak a different first language, right? I learned all these lessons at Panasonic as well. Some of that in-person teaming is really important just to get to know each other beyond the job and build some foundational comfort and trust. So I was fortunate that I had some of that before the pandemic started. Once the pandemic kicked in and all bets were off in terms of travel, we, like many companies, did our best to stay connected with different forums of Zoom and tried to mix it up with not only Zoom meetings, but also Zoom happy hours and more social moments, et cetera. I will tell you what became really hard for me amidst the pandemic and me and the US team is just being the whole voice and weight of this market for all of our colleagues in Israel, right? So when they were able to travel, they were able to come over here and listen to customers and consumers and hear it directly from customers, right? It put a lot of burden on me and other colleagues to just be the whole voice and weight of this market. And we're still working through that. We sort of carry the day there, but it was really hard. There's nothing like hearing a customer speak directly, right? It all resonates and becomes real when you're in a real person's life with a real pregnancy, with a real issue, versus through a translation trying to explain pain points, et cetera.
Totally. So I think this conversation is definitely moving into how we can shape the organization of the future. So in your opinion, with experience in both large and small companies, What does the organization of the future look like?
So, and I'll frame it through a marketing organization, right? Just I think to be more relevant to this community, but perhaps infuse some broader thinking there. So I really believe in the power of end, right? And you've probably heard that in other forums as well from different leaders. So the classical marketing discipline around positioning and customer understanding and a lot of that sort of 4P knowledge, I still believe is very relevant foundationally. However, the organization of the future not only needs to have that sensibility and toolkit, but also the more modern playbook in terms of insights and analytics, with an emphasis on analytics and data-driven insights and first-party data and ability to more deeply understand your consumer and be more personalized in how to reach her. The organization of the future is bricks and mortar and e-commerce, really omni-channel experiences. And we see that in retail and CPG, and we see that in healthcare, right? If you think about healthcare, and I'll just stick with pregnancy care in my current space, why in 2021 does a woman have to go to a clinic or a doctor's office for all of her care where she could do everything else through her phone, right? So how do we start to shift some of the care delivery to the home and have a hybrid care experience? So bricks and mortar and e-commerce or virtual visits in care. The organization of the future also should reflect the faces of the consumers whom we serve. So I am a big believer in diversity and inclusion and really looking around the table and keeping each other honest in terms of representing different voices and faces and lifestyles and life stages. The other part of the organization of the future is both the big co-leadership with the entrepreneurial spirit. So it also mix up leadership teams to include people intentionally who came from startup world and how to stretch and build different muscles to build businesses and brands. And I think that's what's going to be so powerful, how to sort of mix it up with different old and new skill sets, with diversity and inclusion, and with big co and small co types of experiences.
100%. And with all of these changes that need to be made, tell us how important training is when it comes to this growth.
Training is critical, right? And I think even to attract and retain employees, to help employees understand that we're investing in your development, and this is the place where you're going to learn and grow, is really important. What I would say about training is it needs to take different forms. So there's always the formalized training that's part of a job, right? So at J&J, we had the marketing excellence curriculum, which gave folks opportunity for live classroom, now virtual visit type training, but also online training that's self-paced, right? Where you can beef up your skills. I'm also, though, a big believer in on-the-job training. And I think that's the most valuable training. And managers really need to help give employees feedback and get the courage to give real candid feedback. So I think on-the-job training is really important. The last thing I'd say is you have to own it. You can't expect your manager to own your growth and development. Back to, if it's to be, it's up to me. You need to know what you're playing for, what skills you want to develop, what skills you need to develop to achieve your aspirations, and ask for that feedback if you're not getting it, so you could develop and own your personal work plan.
I love that. If it's to be, it's up to me. 100%. So talking about all of these learnings and all of the brands you've touched upon in your career, is there a certain success story or campaign you can share with us that best represents how powerful a great organization and great teamwork and forward thinking can be?
Sure. So I will actually go back to my diffuse Synthes example because it started out as one of the toughest assignments. And I alluded earlier how I earned the confidence and support of that organization by putting points on the board. So when I joined, it was actually amidst the Beijing Olympics, ironically, which are coming up again, right? A very different version of them, but the Beijing Olympics. And we had hired Coach K to be our spokesperson for Depew because he had two Depew hips. And really the brief for me was J&J has this huge partnership with the Olympics that we're going to be promoting as a corporate sponsorship. We have Coach K as our spokesperson. We want to do something with Depew, and we have no idea what to do with all those assets. Go figure it out, Debra. Oh, and by the way, you have 90 days. So my mantra was 90 days to Beijing. And I really pulled together my team in terms of agency partners, in terms of leaders on the businesses that were running the hip and knee businesses at the time, and corporate equity at J&J, right? Other key stakeholders. And we created this big idea of Depew Never Stop Moving, leaning into the persona of Coach K as someone, and I don't know if the audience knows Coach K. I mean, I'm a Duke grad, so he's extra special to me, but he's actually retiring this year after many, many years of coaching Duke and the Dream Team in the Olympics. But he is really the persona of Never Stop Moving. And his story was how his joint replacements allowed him to continue to achieve and go on and realize his aspirations, not only as someone that's physically fit as a person, but through his rigorous coaching job, right, which was physically demanding. And that campaign was incredibly rewarding and galvanizing the organization, bringing us together. And for me, earning the confidence of the leaders at Depew that this alien, from packaged goods could actually add something valuable to the business. It created swagger. I'll never forget this. I was at a national sales meeting. We had a distributor sales force. And when I played the spot for the campaign, I got a standing ovation from the sales force, right? Which was, I still remember that moment. And I also remember the internal folks noticing that moment. Well, if this person could create some support and swagger with the sales organization, there's talent here to lean into. And hopefully I set an example for more talent to come from consumer and a different skill set, right? To bring just different texture to that business.
I love that story. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I want to shift gears a little bit and do some forward thinking part of our chat. So with such a long and uncertain year behind us, actually a few years behind us, what is one valuable takeaway or learning that you're definitely taking with you into 2022?
So one is just the importance of self-care. I think early in the pandemic, it was so easy to get sucked into all Zoom all the time, right? Because there was no transit time and there were no scheduled lunches and all these things that naturally broke up my day didn't exist anymore. And I'm working for an Israeli company where we start super early, right? So, just had a few personal setbacks that were reminders of the importance of self-care and really building that into your schedule in terms of healthy eating and exercise and mental wellness and owning that and holding myself accountable. So that's a big lesson.
I feel like in this new era, you can't even go to the bathroom because you don't have that 2 minutes in between a meeting in person where, I'm just going to run to the bathroom. You're on Zoom and it's like, well, why are you 2 minutes late? There's no excuse. You don't have to get from one end of the building to the next. So I even think that's a challenge.
Absolutely. And again, part of something to own, right? How do you own your schedule and build in those spaces just so you have some wellness breaks?
So on a larger scale, more consumer facing, what behaviors and trends and consumer expectations do you expect we might see this year ahead? Are there any particular trends you're focusing on in this next year?
Sure. So I'll just stick with my space, but it's broader to retail. It's just the shift to digital health and on-demand care, right? So I would say it was an unmet need before the pandemic, and it became an acute need during the pandemic, where people still needed healthcare. But when we were all on lockdown and buildings were closed, or you were afraid of getting exposed to COVID, we all learned how to use telehealth. And it has shined a light on the importance of tools to make telehealth visits more robust and more effective. So I think we'll see more use of telehealth. an expanded array of caregivers. Again, I'm sticking with my space. What's really interesting in healthcare, and I'll use obstetrics as an example, but it could be anything. It's not only about your core caregiver of the OB if I'm a pregnant person, but also extended care of my mental health expert and my nutritionist and social services and broader array of caregiving to support consumers or patients in their journey. And now we have the power of touch and tech to extend that, right, and make it more viable. So I'm bullish on this shift, and I think we need more tools to deepen adoption and make it more meaningful. The other thing we're just seeing is consumer demands are through the roof, right? We want everything on demand through our phone, and we want it when we want it, how we want it, personalized just for me. And that insight, I think, also has become elevated during the pandemic, where we were forced to live off our phones more, right? And have more demands met through e-commerce.
So I love the benefit of telehealth that has come out of this pandemic. Oh no, Leanne, are you coming to shut us down?
Not to shut you down, just a gentle reminder that we are reaching the end of time, but you carry on.
I have one last question that I just would love to ask. And I know you have touched upon this with the tools and the telehealth that you were just speaking about. But I would love to expand on it. What are the ways brands can step in to create a better world? I mean, especially as Nouveau is already doing this, how can other brands step in and do the same?
So brands really need to understand their consumers and the state of culture and the state of the world, and authentically create value from benefits that you can deliver given who you are and what you have to offer. And I think every brand should take a step back, just knowing we're in a very fragile world right now with climate change and political pressures and living 2 years into a pandemic. And what can you as a brand and a company offer given who you are to better serve your consumers? And I think we're seeing brands do that. I'll use a brand outside my category that, Lysol and Clorox, two brands, right? The thick of the pandemic, what could those brands do? We were all petrified of germs and surfaces and just those brands, right, being there and creating new standards for cleaning in hotel rooms and on planes and in our homes and doing everything they could to make their products available. Those are great examples of brands better serving consumers by being who they are and what benefits they can offer versus borrowed interest of trying to play, to someone else's territory.
I love that to end our last question. And before we close out, Debra, I just would like to also ask you, do you have any closing words or any last piece of advice for anyone tuning in?
If it's to be, it's up to me. Take risks in your career. There's no the way, there's my way. So know what you want, go for it, and enlist the help of mentors and sponsors to get there.